All right, welcome back. So we're in Module 13 now, and we're going to deal with maintaining Windows itself. Now, the different aspects we're going to focus on is going to be different Windows settings that are really important settings. Now, there's a lot of settings that we'll deal with over the course of this course, and we're going to focus on critical Windows settings and different aspects of backing up. Along with that, we're going to deal with maintaining your hard drives. Um, we'll talk about using a command line interface, and then there's a review at the end, and you can go through the review on your own if you like. There's a summary. There's different things you can go play with that are optional. All right. So starting out, they give us a list of different objectives that the author has for this chapter. And essentially, what we're focusing on now is that Windows is installed, and we need to maintain it once it has been installed. All right. So we've got the control panels, our number one go-to. The control panel, I come down to my search. It's not letting me go there. Let me pull on my other screen and access it there. That's right. I click control panel, and I will get an applet will pop up. I'll drag it over here. Here's the applet for control panel for Win 10. And I can size this thing out as big as I want it. And the different settings I have access to here are system and security settings, and we'll jump in there. That's where our main focus is going to be today. We've also got user accounts, different appearance, personalization settings, the clock, the region that you're dealing with, accessibility, different applications or programs, they'll refer to them here, installed on the device. If you want to manage hardware and sound or network connectivity. So, drag this out of the way and I'll bring it back as we need it. So, we've got another module which digs deeper, and that's in troubleshooting Windows after the startup. This is just the standard, here's the things that we need to take care of, traditional housekeeping, if you will. Now, when it comes to updates, we've got to be careful about updates because they're not all, I hate to say good, but for lack of better words, they're not all beneficial initially. There have been times that Microsoft has released updates, and when they release them, your computer sees, hey, there's a new update available. And if you have your system set to automatically go install it, the system does that. And if they are not what I would call a good update, and they have issues that have yet to be addressed, you just installed something or allowed something to be installed that could potentially do damage or harm your system in some way. So we've gone through a lot just to get this thing up and running. Now, we want to make sure that it stays up to date. Now, your system, as you installed it, it had a build number associated with it. That build number, it tells you at what point that operating system was written, and then from that point to today. Those are all the updates that will need to be installed for your system to be current when it comes to Windows updates. Now, these updates, it could be updating Windows itself, primarily security updates, different applications, drivers, firmware, all kinds of things that will need to be updated. They determine what needs to be updated, and they don't do it just because they were looking for something to do. There's a significant cause behind why they perform these updates and why they've gone about creating them. But like I said, they're not always perfect. Microsoft has no qualms with releasing something that has issues associated with it. We saw that in Windows 8. We saw it in Windows 8.1. And it wasn't until 8.2 that they had resolved those bugs or issues with those previous versions of operating systems that they knew existed, and sold the product, released the product anyway. Okay, so I'm not bashing Microsoft. I'm a firm believer in Microsoft products. It's just that I know what we're dealing with. All right, so aside from updates, and our primary rationale behind updates is to secure our device, make it secure and stable. Microsoft is aware of different security threats. They create these updates. These updates patch our security, first and foremost. So they keep our operating system secure from threats to a degree. The next item that we got to deal with is antivirus, anti-malware software. We have to have it installed and configured to scan your system regularly to maintain that security. Now you'll find later on in the course, we'll have 4 or 5 chapters in a row that seems like all we talk about is security. Because security is very important with what we're dealing with. That fast, somebody can hack your system, take it over, and everything you've spent all this time and money creating to be productive, to work with, whatever it may be, it's either gone or inaccessible to you. We want to make sure that doesn't happen, or do the best we can to avoid that happening. So we got network security settings. We'll deal with that more in another module, but there's more things that we have to deal with. We want to make sure that everything that we're doing is getting backed up. And by backed up, it's being stored in a way that allows us to recover should bad things happen. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. Now, we've got to always be keeping a clean house, if you will. If you're not using something, get rid of it. If you have software installed you're not using, get rid of it. It's taking up free space in the system, or it's taking up available space in the system that could be used for something else. If that software is set to execute on startup, it's running every time you start your computer. That's a thing. So it's taking up CPU capacity. It's taking up RAM. It's beating up your system, and you're not even using it potentially. Okay? So we get rid of software we don't need or we're not using, and we need to clean up the hard drive and make sure that we've got at least 15% free space. And that's on our C drive. And C drive being the primary storage for our operating system. Now, beyond that, there's different ways to go about cleaning up our hard drive. Talk more about that later. When we talk about laptops, we need to think about different power options because they're battery powered, and those packs need to be recharged, and how we go about recharging them will impact the longevity or the life of those battery packs. Now, one of the things that we talk about in here is virtual machines. The same security aspects that apply to a physical computer also apply to a virtual machine. So if we have a virtual machine running, we have to defend it, update it, all the things that we have listed here. We have to do to the virtual machines as well, not just the primary physical device that we're dealing with. Okay. So now on the control panel, pop it up here, we went through the different things. So they're talking about the settings app. Now, I can go in on, hang on a second, I'm not sure what just happened. Okay, not sure what just happened. But let's recover from that. There it goes again. Apologize, it's a glitch just kind of threw me there for a second. So I was going to come over to settings. So I right click on my start menu, I click settings, and that's a different applet. So I've got settings that I can go deal with, and I also have control panel. So here's my settings app, and got different things that I can deal with in here. And close that. We've got a number of different things that we can deal with, whether it's my account, school account, the different applications that are installed, the devices that are connected to it. If I'm using this for gaming, the things that are associated with gaming on a computer, my network connections and everything associated with it, whether we're dealing with a VPN, standard Ethernet or dial-up or Wi-Fi, whatever it may be. We've got that in network and internet. And then we've got personalization. Okay. Now, we've got privacy and then system as well. So here's their interface that they're showing here on settings, and I just showed you mine. I'll pull up another one. And there's my version of it on my install. Okay. Either way, we've got access to a variety of different things. And on this applet, we can go do whatever we needed to address relative to those settings. Change the language that we're dealing with, or the time, go through, do updates. We have a sound applet where we can go in and go click it here. There's a sound, hardware and sound. Come into sound. And here's an applet that I can manipulate sound. I've got a mail applet that I can go deal with. There's a variety of different applets that we can go through and access. If I want to manage Outlook, Outlook's part of the Office suite, but it's also built into the OS. Right? So you don't have to have Microsoft Office to be dealing with it or to use it. So from there, we've got to deal with power options, and there's two schools of thought. And it goes back to, let's say, the CTS 1150 class that I teach. When I talk about the biggest threat to our computer's health is heat. the devices are constantly generating heat, and that heat causes failure over time, causes things to degrade or become compromised. So how do we decrease heat? Well, more airflow. If I shut the computer off or I minimize the amount of tasks being performed, it's like us taking a nap. You take a nap in the AC, you're cooler. You're out running around in the sun, you get hot. You could potentially end up with heat stroke, and as hot as it is today while I'm recording this. There's different things we can do. We can set our computer in sleep mode, or standby mode, or suspend mode. Call it whatever we want to call it. And that will allow us to minimize the number of tasks being used. All right, so on a laptop, we're using about 1 or 2% of the power for each hour in sleep mode. So that means we're getting, what, between 50 and 100 hours out of it in sleep mode. But if we were just to leave it running, it's not going to last that long, traditionally. We want it to go into hibernation, or we want it to go into sleep, so that it reduces the amount of demand on the processor. The workload goes down to bare minimum, bare necessities. And we should be good to go. It'll last longer. Now, one of the things, when we're done with the computer, do we want to shut it off or leave it running and let it go into sleep mode? That's where I get in these two schools of thought. One is, the more you turn things off and turn things on, the bigger swing from hot to cold. The bigger swing from hot to cold, the more dramatic, the more potential damage can be done because of changes in temperature. Changes in temperature can cause damage to your computer. So some would argue that we'll just leave it on and let it go to sleep, and it's going to last longer than if you shut it off. And it's, both arguments are valid, but if you leave it on, it's still consuming electricity, and you're going to have to pay for that. So there's a cost associated with leaving it on. There's also a benefit by it being available real quick. You don't have to go through a restart. So we can go through and customize a power plan and set how long we want it to go before it either turns off the display or puts the computer into a sleep mode. And you can have settings for a laptop, whether you're on battery or you're plugged in. Settings are different depending on those. And we've got a variety of different settings that we can go through and modify, and the different power options and the local power settings. Now, we've got to take this into consideration because there's a few reasons. One, I don't want the thing running when it doesn't need to be. Two, I don't want it accessible to others, and we'll deal with that more in future modules. I don't want it accessible to others any more than it has to be. Okay. But our main focus right now, it really should be, plan ahead for bad things that could potentially happen. And that's the gist of this whole module. Plan ahead for bad things that could happen. So let's say something really bad happened. Computer caught on fire. Building caught on fire. What you going to do? How can you recover from that? Were you ready to be able to recover from that? Now, I've got a friend of mine that owned a lawn maintenance company, and he had me help him set up backups, and he backed everything up, doing incremental backups. And he did it to DVDs. He kept the DVDs in a file cabinet in his office. And he said, anything happens, I'm good. And he calls me one day and he says, yeah, the building burned down. I said, you got your DVDs? He said, yeah, they were in the building too. They're all gone. So the steps that he took to back things up at that point in time, and the cloud wasn't an option at that point, he was in a bad situation. His trucks and equipment and everything, he could replace that easy enough. But all of his account information, who owed him money, who he owed money to, that was all gone. And it became very difficult for him to recover and save face. A lot of people felt really bad for him for what happened, but had he stored his data outside of the business as well, made a second copy and took it home with him, non-issue. He could have been back up and running the next day. Today we've got the ability to store to a thumb drive, store to the cloud, and there are different types of backups that we can go do. And one, let's go no backup. That's not an option for me. Create a backup, take it with you, or you create a backup to the cloud. All right, there's software that'll help you do that. And bad things happen, you're good. You can have your own private cloud or you can have a public cloud. Either way, you recover from it. Switch between the two, or how you decide between the two, is going to have to do with what it is that's on your system. And sometimes it could be industry or legal regulations that require you to store in certain ways. Okay. So there's, depending on the industry you're in, the data that you're keeping, there's rules to how you back it up and where you back it up. So we've got it backed up on a local file server and to the cloud. Best of both worlds. So we've got to worry about how we've got this backed up. Do I have one copy? Do I have two copies? Now, not just how many copies I have, but where is it stored? Is it stored just in the building, or do we have it stored off-site? All rules that we need to think about. And they call it their 3-2-1 setup. Now, I can do 3 different kinds of backups. One's a full backup. I back up everything that I have. It can take a very long time when we're talking about giant databases or massive storage of information. Or I do a full backup, let's say on Saturday. And then every other day of the week, I just save the changes from the previous day. Worst case scenario, I might miss a few hours of work. Now, differential is it backs up files that have changed since the last full backup. These incremental are from day to day. So here's a backup of what got changed on Monday, backup of what got changed on Tuesday, backup of what got changed on Wednesday. This one is a backup of everything since the last full backup. Now, as long as I'm backing up, I should be okay. The less frequent my backups, the higher risk I am putting myself into losing something. So the more frequent I back things up, whether it's incremental or differential, the better off I'm going to be. But it takes time. A common practice is do a full backup once a week and do incrementals every night. The worst case scenario, you lose a day or half a day, whatever it may be, from when the failure took place. Okay. You'll rotate backup media. You don't want to steady be overwriting on the same thing. You want to have different backups. Okay. go through and explain a different rotation plan. I'm a firm believer in backup to the cloud and backup to a local external drive. As long as I've done that, I'm good. Computer blows up, I'm backed up local, and I've got it in the cloud as a secondary. I've got redundancy in everything that I do. We need to test it, make sure it works, keep these things safe in a place that, had he had that stuff in a fireproof safe, he'd have been good. It was in a file cabinet. Everything in there got cooked. So we need to test to make sure things are working the way that we expect them to work. We need to back up not just the data, but a system image. Now, what a system image essentially is, let's look at it down at the hard drive at its lowest level. The hard drive is just a bunch of ones and zeros, bytes that are turned on or off. If we did something similar to, I think about the game Minecraft or pixel art relative to this concept. So if everything was either black or white in pixel art, and you just turn the pixels on and off, the configuration of pixels that were turned on and off will create a picture. Well, that's what hard drive essentially is. The configuration of ons and offs grouped together in bits, bytes, files, that all creates the mapping that is your hard drive. If I took a picture at any given point, captured the image of your hard drive, and then laid that image down onto an identical hard drive, it would be essentially cloning that image, all the ones and zeros. My new drive would be identical to yours. So that's what an image is, the system image that they're talking about. It's a backup of the entire system, and it's a special kind of file. It's a Windows imaging file, but there's also third-party software that does it as well. Now, we need to have a backup plan, whether we're backing up to OneDrive, which is the cloud, backing up local, see the history of how we're backing up. Now, that's backups themselves. We've also got the ability to restore from a restore point, which I need to configure my system to capture these pictures in time every time I shut the computer down. So here's a reason to shut the computer down. Every time I shut it down, I capture a picture of what it looked like at that point in time. I capture a restore point. The more often I capture restore points, or take those images, the better off I am. And it's almost like being able to go back in time. If I captured a picture or an image of the way things were on Monday and bad things happen on Wednesday, and I couldn't fix it, you know what? I'm going to go back to the way things were on Monday. The problem is that anything that happened after Monday is now gone. Any of the changes I made after Monday is gone. So we've always got to keep that in mind. Okay, got to be careful about where we save things relative to our backups. I can restore files and folders depending on how I've set up my file history and my ability to recover based on history. Okay. Now, I want to restore a file or folder from a previous version. Go to that file, look at previous versions, and it has different versions of it. Click it, restore. I want to go back to the way it was. So there's an option. Okay. I've talked about system image. Like I said, essentially that's a snapshot of the way things looked at a specific point in time. Now, these restore points, if we have not configured our restore point, we won't be able to go through and do recovery. All right. So we have to go and configure this up front. If we don't configure it up front, it's like having an insurance policy or an insurance plan. If you didn't buy insurance, you can't expect a payout when bad things happen. If we don't configure the system restore, we're not going to have a recovery point there when we need it. So all we've got to do is go into the system, set up system restore, configure it, and make sure it's turned on, and apply. It's not that big a deal to set it up, but unless you set it up, you don't have that. Now I can manually go in and say, hey, create a restore point right now. That's an option. Or, like I said, I can do it on shutdowns. And every time I shut the computer down, it captures it. Now my hard drives, I've got two different kinds of hard drives that we're dealing with today. Hard disk drives, which is an actual disk. It looks like a metal DVD in a way. And now we've got the solid state drives that are like a memory card, but way bigger and way better. So we always want to keep at least 15% of free space on our C drive. Not just the hard drive, but on our C drive. I may want way more than that on my hard drive. Okay. When we delete things from the hard drive, they go to the recycle bin. They're not gone. We have to empty the recycle bin to make them go away. A lot of times I will compress files into zip files to try and save space. That's something I'm not using very often. I create a zip folder and then get rid of the expanded version. These are all files that exist on the hard drive. That's all we're talking about is files that are on the hard drive. We don't focus as much on RAM in this class. It's random access memory. We'll talk more about that in CTS 1150. Now, we can go into File Explorer, and that's that little folder icon down in your taskbar down at the very bottom of your window using Windows. Right. And pop that open, and then I can right-click on the file and get File Explorer Applet, and that applet, they've got, see if that pops up here. They didn't show an image of it. Here we go. Here's different options relative to File Explorer. So File Explorer is that folder, but we can go into the control panel and change settings for Explorer. Now this is changing things like there are files that exist that are defaulted to be hidden files. We don't want people to see them. I don't want anybody to see them, not even me. And unless I go turn them on, they're hidden, I can't see them. If I can't see them, I can't mess with them. And if I can't mess with them, I can't do any damage to them. So I want to keep these hidden files hidden. I may want to go in and view hidden files from time to time because I need to see what's going on behind the scenes. So I would go show hidden files, folders, or drives, or I can hide different things. And I've got different settings in there. I may want to make them more restrictive than they are by default or less restrictive than they are by default. But traditionally, it would be more restrictive more frequently than less restrictive. So aside from that aspect of it, I can go in and clean up this hard disk. So one of the things that I can do, I go into Explorer and I can right click on the disk. One of the options is going into properties for that disk and right click. Let me see if I can pull that up and show you on mine. All right, here we go. So here's my version of this. I just went into Explorer, File Explorer, that little folder at the bottom of your screen, and I opened it up, and from there I went to C drive, I right clicked on it, and I clicked properties. So here's the properties of my Windows C drive. This is where my OS lives. So I've got a decent sized hard drive here, and how much is used? I've got a third of it being used. I still have 2/3 available. I can click Disk Cleanup, and it will go through and get rid of things that I don't need. And then when I'm done, we're all good. I may be able to free up some space. I can compress the drive and save some disk space, so things that aren't necessarily needed would get compressed. Right, so there's a variety of things we can do there. On Disk Cleanup, I go through and decide what I want to clean up, get rid of. And then I perform those tasks. All right. Make sure that when you get rid of something, it's something you are not going to need anymore. All right. Now, this is changing over time because of what we're talking about. We have two different types of drives. Like I said, HDDs and SSDs. All right. We predominantly deal with HDDs on the optimization when we go defrag it. And we can do it with an SSD. We should do it at least once a week. How it happens is different between the two, but your interaction with the system still achieves the same goal. Okay. So essentially, we go through and find bad sectors, and we can repair them, or we're getting rid of things that may not be needed. Now, the best analogy that I've got for this is to do spring cleaning on a closet or in a garage. It's something I need to do in my garage over the next few weeks. I just reorganize things so like items are all together. Trip plan to the Keys in the first part of August. So when the time comes, I want to be able to access everything I need for that trip in one central location. So instead of things being spread out all over and those items being fragmented in different places, I bring them all together or defrag them. Like items are all together. And I don't have to wander around trying to find things. That's the logic behind what's taking place here. I want things to be in a specific cluster or logical grouping. Sometimes it's called a file allocation unit. So that's my logic of keeping my dive gear together, my fishing gear together, all that stuff in the same place. So that's what defrag will do for us on our hard drives. And they talk about the difference when it comes to solid state drives, and we're trimming it. All right. So with that said, we want to make sure that the drive is as efficient as it's supposed to be. Think about it like if you're trying to work in a kitchen and you had stuff laying all over the counters, a sink full of dishes, pots sitting on the stove, and now it's time to go cook. It makes it kind of difficult. So we just got to make sure we have a clean house before we try to do work. And that's what took place in that previous slide, this previous page. So indexing essentially means how we access things. Our ability to index things helps us to speed up searches to go find things. So indexing essentially allows us to put things in a certain order. And if things are in a specific order, man, I can control them and I can access them a whole lot faster. Right? So the more we have things in order, the easier it is to access things, more efficient the system becomes. Right? So we can use disk management, that applet, to go in, and here's an example of it, to go in and manage the partitions and the different disks that we have. Now, when I say partitions, I can have a disk, and on this one there are 3 different disks. This one has more than one partition on it, and the partition is saying here's a logical grouping or an area that's reserved for the operating system. Here's an area that's reserved for data, say databases, whatever it may be. And each logical grouping has memory reserved or allocated for it. And we format that memory in a certain way depending on what we're trying to do with it. Whether we're dealing with a FAT system, FAT, and that's an old school system of file configuration and file access, or new technology file system, which we see an example of here with this NTFS. Old school FAT was slower. We're talking about FAT32, slower, and it was designed for standalone computers. It wasn't designed for networking, and you had permissions associated with those files and folders on that computer. Back in, let's say, the 90s, we came out, or Microsoft came out with NTFS, New Technology File System, because they needed to have a new way of doing things that aligned with networking. NTFS allows us to have permissions and access that's a network-related permission and access. So it doesn't matter what computer you log into, it's a network, either individual permission or group permission, file permission. So with that said, we've got FAT, 3264, and then we have NTFS. You can't switch back and forth between the two. It just gets really complicated, really ugly. So know what we're going to do before we go deal with anything. So from that, we can change the size of partitions. We can delete partitions, make new partitions, depending on what we want to do. But try to do whatever you're going to do up front and not make changes later, unless it's a significant change has been made in how you do things. And then, all right, we've got to change how we do things. We also have to have the system that aligns with how we're doing things now. Okay. So once we have the disk configured, kind of initialize it, we can have a disk that has a master boot record on it, and that's how we start the computer. We've talked about that previously. We can mount a drive. Mounted drive is a drive that can be accessed from a folder or another volume. And it's just saying, here's some more space that I have that I'm going to mount to an existing drive. So it's almost like saying, in a way, I've rented a storage unit. So here's my drive C that has all of my files and folders in it. And I've got a folder here that it doesn't really exist here. Logically, it's here, but physically, it's somewhere else. So that could be a networked drive that we're accessing. We'll call it a mounted drive in this instance. So for that, we need to go through an applet, and that's on the volume wizard to where we're pointing to wherever that folder is or wherever that drive is that we're trying to access. It's got a graphic that lets us see how much is free and how much is not. Now, dynamic disks and got dynamic volumes as well. What that essentially means is when things are dynamic, they're not fixed. A real good example of how this works is if I was talking about a virtual machine. Say I want an instance of Windows 10 running on a virtual machine, or running as a virtual machine on my Windows 10 box. So my Windows 10 box that I'm running this off of right now that we see, I can set up Hypervisor or Hyper-V and create a hypervisor which will manage my virtual machines. And once I've done that, I can have what looks like everything we see right here, but it's virtual. It's like having a second computer, but it's running virtually. Now, by running virtually, it's piggybacking off of my system, using resources that my system has. Those resources being CPU, RAM, the network access, as well as the hard drive. And when I go to create that virtual machine, it'll ask me, do you want it dynamic or do you want it fixed? And how much space do you want? So you know what? I want it dynamic. Let's say my max capacity would be 2 gig. And by it being dynamic, what that means is I have the ability to go up to 2 gig, but that amount of space that's between how much I'm using and the maximum, that portion that I haven't used yet but I have available to me, is available to other resources should they need it if I'm not using it. So that's where the dynamic aspect comes in. It allows it to grow and shrink based on demand, as opposed to it's a fixed amount of storage and stuff that's been allocated and is not used. Well, it can't be used by anybody else or any other resources. We got to take into consideration. One of the things that we talk about is redundancy and the ability to have multiple hard disks to store our data. And our data can include our C drive as well. Now, what RAID means is a redundant array of inexpensive disks. Now, these disks may not be inexpensive depending on the type of disk and the size. It could be really, really expensive. All right. So RAID level, let me see if we got a picture of it. I'm not seeing it. All right. And it's a physical configuration. It's something that I deal with in the CTS 1150 in more depth than here. But a RAID level 0. The hard drive is striped, and what that means is you write things more than once, so that if something happens to the original copy, you still got another copy somewhere else. All right, so that's striping. Okay. And you could have multiple drives, and where you've got things stored, it could be here, there, and that's striping. Now, RAID 1 is mirroring. And essentially what that means is I have 2 hard drives, and everything I did on one, I did on a second one. So here it is. Drive E, here's another drive, identical to it. So here, drive D is 2 different drives together. This is striped, and everything that I did is here, there, and everywhere. So if one fails, not necessarily missing out on everything. If I have everything on one fails, I'm in bad shape. Now, if I have mirrored, it's a problem because I'm doing double the work. Over here, yeah, I'm doing double the work. This one I don't have fault tolerance, meaning if one of these fails, I'm potentially going to lose something. One of these fails, I'm not losing anything. Okay? So there are higher levels of RAID. Go up to RAID level 10. And essentially, we would end up with multiple hard drives. And if anything happened to one of those hard drives, I just pull it out, put a new one in, and it self-heals. It finds out what disappeared, and it recreates that drive. I had to do it for a friend of mine. His house burned down, and he had a personal cloud. The personal cloud, he says, "Can you help me out? Can you fix it? I don't know what happened." He says, "I know the fire, but I don't know if it was the firefighter's chemicals or the fire that damaged it. Didn't know." So he brought it to me in a trash bag. It smelled horrible. Cleaned everything up as best we could. It still had that smell to it, the fire. But essentially, it had 5 drives in it. And of the 5 drives, one of them had failed. And it was warrantied. It was a Seagate drive. It was under warranty. If it ever fails within that time frame, we'll send you a new one. We didn't know what the cause of the failure was, whether it was heat or it failed on its own. Pulled it out, mailed it to Seagate. They sent a new one. I installed it, powered the thing up. It self-healed. While he was on vacation, I texted him, said, "Hey, your personal cloud's up and running, so any pictures that you guys take are now being saved to your personal cloud." So it allows for us to have that redundancy if bad things happen. So there's different ways to look at what's going on with the file itself. Check the health status of the hard disk. If we try to find it and it says it's unknown, that traditionally is a virus issue. If it's unreadable, I read it before. Let's go restart and try and find out what's taken place. Fail, it's traditionally it's damage. Could be cable damage, damage to the drive itself. Active is what we are actually using at that point in time. It has to do with MBR, the master boot record. The EFI system partition, I don't deal with that so much in this class. Unallocated, how much space is marked unallocated? We haven't partitioned it, haven't used it. Formatting is how we have it formatted. That's FAT, FAT32, FAT64, NTFS. When the drive is first sensed by Windows, it sees it. It's going to get a basic disk status. That there's a disk there. And it may not be partitioned. It's just a standalone drive. We can connect to it and set it up. All right. Dynamic. It could be an online with errors, online or missing. It's a foreign drive that's not a local drive. Could be issues with the data, or there could be input-output issues associated with the connection. Let me just try and bring it back online. Now, sometimes we'll have to use what's called a command line interface. I can go to my search bar down in the bottom of my screen and type in CMD. And it will allow me to pop up a command prompt. So here's a command prompt. And things that I can do, IPCONFIG /ALL. It'll give me all of my IP configuration or my network configuration associated with this device. How long I've been connected, the different virtual machines I've got set up, hardwired, Wi-Fi connections, anything about any of it. And I'm not limited to just that command. I can go run as they show here. I can run different applications. So it's msinfo32.exe. I can exit. There's different things applications I can run. And I access different files, folders within my C drive to be able to do what I need to do. This is a language all its own. It takes some while to learn the ins and outs of command line. Back in the day, before we had GUI, what we see here, graphical user interface, that was all we had was command line. And interacting with it was very cumbersome because it was not so forgiving. Things had to be a certain way. And if they weren't right, it did not work. Now, if I came here, let's see if this will let me. I typed in WinVer. And we don't see anything here. But what it did was it popped up this. Now, something I talked about before was the OS build. This is the build number. When I installed this, that's the point at which the updates stopped. Now, this may have taken place a year after I did the install. So if that's the case, then I've got a year's worth of updates that would have to be installed for me to be current. So if I want to find out about Windows version, I can do that. Just go type in WinVer. So these apps that we've been looking at, the applets, I can pull those up in a command line. There's different special characters that means certain things. There's a wild card character, which is the asterisk symbol. And it essentially means in everything else. So if I said directory A asterisk, it means with a file name of A and everything after it. So there's different directory commands. I don't go into detail about becoming a master of command line or command prompt. Something that takes some time to get used to. And with what we've got today, unless you're getting deep into networking, you're not going to have to deal with it so much. If you're getting deep into networking, if you're taking one of the server classes that I regularly teach, you'll deal with PowerShell in there. And you will deal with a lot of command line. And PowerShell is, in my opinion, more difficult to deal with, less forgiving than what I was just dealing with here. This is a little more forgiving than PowerShell is. And they're similar. And that's PowerShell is something that we deal with in, like I said, another course. So we've got to have the path to what it is folder that we're dealing with, and then what it is we want to do. And it has to be written a specific way. Okay. So we've got a variety of different commands that you can type in. Go play with it if you like. Just go down and type in CMD down in that search bar in the bottom. Pull it up and go see what you can do. Be careful that you don't change something inadvertently, because these commands are powerful. You can go through and delete things that are very important accidentally. So, like I said, there's commands to manage your hard drives. So I can run check disk on a certain volume or a certain drive. I can delete partitions if I'm not careful. Check disk doesn't do that, but there are a variety of commands that we can do that, like I said, can cause problems. So you've got a few labs in this module, not a lot. All right. This isn't a very difficult module, at least in my opinion, it's not. All right. If you run into problems, reach out to me in Canvas. You go play with the things that exist beyond this point. Review the module summary. Explore the flashcards. The PowerPoint presentations can help you on the module exams or quizzes. So having access to those, they can be very helpful. Final exam is derived from each of the module exams or quizzes. Same test banks that are used in those are used in the final. So just be ready for that aspect of it. And this is just a rehash of what we've gone over and the different topics that were highlighted at the beginning of the module. I'll see you in Module 14.